On a warm summer evening in 1955, a small farmhouse located in the state of Kentucky was the site of an intense night-long gun battle which led the occupants of the house to flee in terror. Even after a fleet of police cruisers were sent to investigate and found the remnants of a gun battle taking place, the reported perpetrators were nowhere to be found. It wasn't until the farmhouse occupants returned later that night that the small perpetrators returned to attack again. Join me in this episode as we unravel the story of when goblins attacked the Sutton farmhouse. Welcome back to Moonlight Lore, everyone. I'm your host, Jordan Hopkins. In today's episode, I'll be discussing the famous but strange alien encounter in the Kentucky countryside just outside the small city of Hopkinsville back in 1955. This story begins on a warm summer Sunday evening on the 21st of August at a small secluded farmhouse owned by the Sutton family just inside the small unincorporated area of Kelly, just roughly 8 miles down the road from the city of Hopkinsville. At the time, the small 3-room farmhouse was packed full of family and friends spending their evenings sharing stories and exchanging laughter. In total, there were 11 people that night at the house. The matriarch of the family, Glennie Langford, her son, Elmar, who went by Lucky, and John Sutton, and both of their wives, Vera and Aline, and also Aline's brother, O.P. Baker. There was also Elmar and John's mutual friends, Billy Ray and June Taylor, and 3 younger children belonging to Glennie who were half-siblings to Elmar and John. All 11 were finishing their ample meals prepared by Glennie when the company gathered around the small living room to continue their night by playing cards and other games to pass the evening. Now, considering at this time America was still recovering and feeling the effects from the Second World War ending just 10 years earlier, the family, like countless others around the country at the time, were unfortunately below the normal standard of living. And the tiny house, while still had a flow of electricity, lacked a flow of running water for indoor plumbing, or lacked modern-day comforts for the time. This is the reason why Billy Ray Taylor had found himself outside a little after 7 p.m. fetching water from the well when he spotted a large, silvery metallic object falling rapidly from the sky. At this time, the sunset was still bright enough to illuminate the object enough for Taylor to see it was heading over the farmhouse, emitting a colorful rainbow fume from its exhaust. As he stood bewildered looking up in the middle of the yard, he claims he watched the object silently soar about 30 to 40 feet over the farmhouse, hover in the distance, and slowly land out of sight beyond the thick tree line surrounding the farmyard. This sight was obviously very strange to see, and having never seen something like this before, Billy Taylor swiftly ran back to the old farmhouse to report what he had seen to the others. Now, as one might expect, when he shared what he had seen, the majority of the house occupants shared a few jokes and laughter at Billy's expense. Billy was a character one wouldn't necessarily take seriously at all times, and they urged him to calm himself and to sit back down to continue their night. Within the next hour, the group's joyful conversations were cut short and interrupted by the loud, incessant barking from the dog outside, directed towards something unknown hiding in the dark underbrush of the tree line. Both Lucky and Billy went to the back of the house, to the back door that gave them an unobscured view of the entirety of the backyard, to try and see what the dog could have been worked up about, thinking it possibly could have been some wildlife like a deer, turkey, or even a bear. But what they saw emerging from the thick brush was nothing they had ever seen before. At first, a pair of glowing yellow eyes could be seen moving slowly towards the house and out of the shadows of the trees. By this time, there was still enough light from the sunset and the illumination from the waxing crescent moon to see the being in its full form. A 3.5-foot tall creature with what looked like a body made of pure silver metal reflecting what looked like the light from the new moon, with long lanky arms extending upwards with what looked like talons for fingers, floated just slightly off the ground, moving closer to the two men staring at it from the farmhouse door. Understandably, the dog took off running with its tail between its legs, presumably to hide under the house where it wouldn't be seen again until the next morning, while both Billy and Lucky were left standing in the doorway in disbelief in what they were seeing. And now completely frozen, the pair of men watched as the creature calmly drifted closer and closer until the faint whimpers of the dog broke their hypnotic gaze, to which they quickly rushed back inside the house to grab a 12-gauge shotgun and a 22 caliber rifle, where they took aim and waited. The creature, now much closer to the doorway, stayed on approach, but keeping its long lanky arms in the air as if it knew it was being held at gunpoint. At this point, the rest of the farmhouse occupants still didn't quite know what was going on. They believed the two were still trying to pull some sort of prank. So Glennie had the three now scared children head off to their beds to avoid being scared further due to the childish antics Billy and Lucky were adamant about performing. What they were claiming, a silvery goblin creature just outside the house, was something Glennie had never heard of before, and it was obviously quite disturbing to everyone else in the house. Though this was no prank, the creature was very much right there, feet away from the back door both Billy and Lucky were staring out of. Seemingly out of anticipation and a case of bad nerves, the two men both took a shot at the figure approaching, which then caused the creature to leap into the air and run back beyond eyesight behind the tree line. Thinking perhaps that was it, the two men lowered their weapons and looked at each other, unknowing on what to say to an upset Glennie demanding they answer her questions. And now, the rest of the family along with the children were right there right at the back door after hearing the arguing and gunshots, wondering what had been going on. And so, Lucky instructed everyone to head back into the living room so they all could talk about what had just happened. Lucky and Billy both waited by the door as everyone dispersed back to the living room, making sure that the creature wasn't going to be coming back to the door. And at this moment, Lucky's brother John had armed himself too with a 20-gauge shotgun in the living room where he was waiting with the women and children when all of a sudden, one of the women gave out a shriek which caused Lucky and Billy to come running. Either it was the same creature or another one, but there it was again, peering through the open window with its unnaturally large yellow eyes glowing and talons running along the window screen. And as soon as he realized what one of the wives were screaming about, John pointed his shotgun and fired. This shot would be true, and John had easily hit his target, and upon entering the room and seeing what had happened, Billy too fired his .22 rifle, hitting the creature as well, causing it to do a flip backwards again and run back out of sight. It was clear to everyone now that this was no prank made up from the minds of Billy and Lucky. Everyone had now seen the creature peering in at them through the open window, and knew it was something none of them had ever seen before. The men decided at this point it might be best to give chase to this creature, to either run it off or to see if they could shoot it again and kill it. Billy led the charge out the back door they had been standing at just a short time before, but when he took his first steps outside, something grabbed him. It was quick, but both Lucky and John following behind Billy could see a long clawed hand reaching down from the rooftop for Billy's head. Whatever the creature was trying to do, it only managed to touch some of the hair on his head, but as soon as the others in the hallway behind Billy screamed, the creature retracted its arm out of view. John's wife Aline quickly reached out for Billy to pull him back inside the safety of the house, while Lucky pushed past with his 12-gauge, aimed at the overhang of the house and shot the creature sitting there staring at him. The shot caused the creature to retreat over to the other side of the roof out of sight, but the next moment Billy shouted at Lucky and pointed, "There's one up in the tree too!" And there it was, another creature perched on a branch of the maple tree just to the right of the house watching the group. Both Lucky and Billy took their shots at the creature, which did in fact hit it. They were certain of that because it did cause the creature to fall off the tree, though when it did fall, it seemed to defy gravity in a way that it only floated slowly down like a feather, and upon hitting the ground, the creature too ran off into the darkness. At the same time as they watched it scurry off, another one came bounding around the right side of the house and scurried off into the darkness as well. This was the first incident more than one had been seen at one time. At this point, 4 shooting incidences had taken place, and each shot proved to have zero effect on the creatures. The first by Lucky and Billy at the back door when they first spotted the one slowly approaching the house, the second was by John and Billy through the living room window, then the third done by Lucky at the creature who grabbed Billy's hair from the rooftop, and finally the fourth incident done by Lucky again at the one sitting in the nearby tree. Notably, all the shooters, Lucky, Billy, and John, all knew their bullets made contact with the invaders, as after every shot, what sounded like bullets hitting a metal bucket could be heard, which coincidentally is similar to that of how Glennie had initially described them, like a 5-gallon gasoline canister with a head on top and small legs, similar to the bright silver metal of her refrigerator. So after realizing the creatures were impervious to their gunfire, Lucky made the decision for everyone to hunker down inside and possibly try to wait out the creatures, trying to think of what to do next, and hope they can remain safe in the confines of their home. But for the next while, the family stayed locked indoors trying to fend off the advancing invaders. Though little action seemed to occur, the occasional noise and shadows seen just beyond the closed window kept everyone on edge. Eventually though, all the sounds of broken branches and tapping on the side of the house became too much for everyone, and around 11 o'clock, the entire farmhouse evacuated and made a run for the 2 vehicles parked out front, one belonging to the Taylors and the other owned by Lucky. As the women and children rushed to pile into the cars, Lucky, John, and Billy stood watch by the cars with their guns as they all got settled in. When it was time, the 3 men hopped inside the cars and sped off into the night towards Hopkinsville. It didn't take long, assuming the adrenaline pumping through their bodies helped apply some weight to the gas pedals, but both vehicles with all family members and friends arrived safely at the front steps of the Hopkinsville Police Department. What is most commonly agreed upon by all is the genuine fear and urgency the family portrayed when storming the front doors of the station. The fact alone the family came to the police station for help had the officers there wondering if they really were in fact telling the truth. The officer at the front desk had no idea how to handle these 11 people bursting in, all trying to shout over one another about what had been happening at their farm. And while trying to calm them all down, the officers managed to piece together what they were saying through the shouting and crying. Eventually, the sergeant at the desk managed to calm everyone enough to instruct only Lucky and Billy to share what had happened to them at the farm. But when the officers got the whole picture, they were conflicted on if what they had been told was the truth. What they all agreed on, though, was the family was certainly frightened enough to be convincing. That, and being told multiple shots were fired on the property, had more than a few officers worried the shots were fired at neighbors or possible human trespassers. And if this was the case, things certainly needed to be checked out at the Sutton farm. One of the officers began radioing the Madisonville Police Headquarters of the Kentucky State Police, informing them of the situation, requesting they send multiple cruisers and troopers to Kelly to meet them. And at this same time, the sergeant at the station phoned Police Chief Russell Greenwell, who was at home sleeping, and debriefed him on the situation. When Greenwell picked up the phone, he was met with an urgent apology for waking him and the sentence which stayed locked in Greenwell's mind for years to come. The sergeant informed him by saying, "Sir, a spaceship has landed at Kelly," to which Greenwell responded with, "If this is your idea of a joke, it's not mine." The sergeant then said, "It's not a joke, Chief. The state police are already sending units." Still not satisfied by the claim that a spaceship had been seen outside of Kelly, but now concerned that the state police were involved, Chief Greenwell hopped in his cruiser and sped off towards the station to meet with his men. When he arrived, he was met with quite the show of force. His officers at the station were preparing to haul out with the occupants of the farmhouse, and a few state troopers who arrived looking for direction to the farmhouse as they were unfamiliar with the country roads at night. And now racing down the back roads in the middle of the night, going roughly 70 to 80 miles per hour, the fleet of vehicles headed up towards Kelly, where they were met with another vehicle belonging to another state trooper from Madisonville waiting for them to lead him to the farmhouse too. And around this same time, as the fleet of cars were getting closer to the farm, another trooper at the Shady Oaks restaurant just a couple miles outside of Hopkinsville reported he had seen and heard what looked like multiple meteors flying overhead, giving off the noise similar to that of artillery fire. He says when he looked out the car window and towards the sky, he could see two of them traveling in a descending motion straight towards the Sutton farmhouse. When the convoy of vehicles finally arrived at the front yard of the Sutton farm, everyone there felt a strange, tense feeling in the air. During the drive and the commotion over the airwaves by the officers, a few more vehicles arrived right behind them. 4 military police officers who were on duty in Hopkinsville from Fort Campbell pulled up. A news reporter from Madisonville with a Deputy Sheriff Bates, a New Era news photographer and his wife had followed them in their own personal vehicles, and along with 1 or 2 other citizens who happened to catch wind of what was going on and wanted to see if it was true what they were hearing. And even though the police had instructed the civilians to stay back near the cars while they searched the area, the photographer who was there jumped out of his car and looked towards the family. In a condescending tone, he asked, "Now show me the roof where this little man is supposed to be sitting." To which it's believed Lucky responded sharply saying, "Supposed hell, he was sitting right there," and pointed towards right above the back door. And during this time, all the officers surrounded the property, searching every dark corner in and around the entire house. But still, even with the police with their guns and flashlights drawn, their car headlights illuminating the outside of the house, the family was still much too scared to go anywhere near their home. For the next while, Chief Greenwell supervised the walkthrough of the house and around the yard, helping his officers and directing the troopers to search specific areas one might find someone or something hiding away. And it was during all this, Greenwell made personal observations kept to himself at the time. Mainly, he was looking for any clues as to what might have caused the Suttons to panic so much, whether it was mistaken identification of something else, or if some alcohol might have played some part of it. Greenwell was possibly a little surprised to find little to no evidence of alcohol being in the premises. Notably, there was a lack of any bottles or hard liquor, zero smell, and only a couple of cans of beer were seen in the wastebasket. But as the search continued for the little men, the feeling in the air that something was wrong was still present. Greenwell mentions after the investigation that during the time spent there, he was surrounded by what he would consider brave men who, including himself, were all on edge. At one point, somebody walking near the house had stepped on a cat's tail, causing it to scream, to which Greenwell said afterwards, "You never saw so many pistols unholster so fast in your life." This incident with the cat would go on to be a permanent joke among those at the precinct and the citizens present. But the night went on with only little evidence being found supporting that something indeed happened at the Sutton farm. The shell casings found, the boxes of used ammunition, the hole through the screen window, and the physical state the family were all in, all told the officers something was there. But what was most compelling was the strange glowing substance found in the grass outside. After his thorough walkthrough of the house, Greenwell joined up with a few men who were inspecting the area just outside the fence line near the trees. According to Lucky, this was the same area where one of those creatures was hit by one of his bullets. The main spot of focus there was a small patch of grass about 1.5 feet in diameter, where a luminous substance was evident. One of the officers jumped the fence to get a closer look, but upon closer inspection of the glowing liquid, it disappeared, leaving nothing strange to the human eye but regular grass. But to Greenwell and the other officers still in the original position when the substance was spotted, they could still see it clearly. For some reason, the substance was only visible at a very specific angle. Nearing the end of their investigation, the police were overall unable to find any substantial evidence that little men were still there, aside from some shotgun casings in the yard, a bullet hole in the screen window, The small amount of a strange substance found in the grass and the genuine fear from the family all suggest something was there at the farm that night. But with no other evidence left over or physical evidence of a spaceship in the woods, no footprints in the hard ground, or any sightings of little goblin men, the police concluded there was no more immediate danger at the farm and began to disperse. With their main focus being to make sure a gun battle between neighbors hadn't taken place, the police were able to also conclude no evidence of other people having been on the property that night as well. Aside from a couple officers seeing a green light off in the distance of the woods, nothing else led to anything substantial. And by this time it was nearing 2 a.m., and with the scene hard to survey in the dark, Greenwell assured the family they were safe for the time being, as they found very little evidence of anything in the near vicinity anymore. He also told them he and his officers would return when the sun came up to continue their investigation in the more favorable conditions of the sunlight. He and the few remaining officers then got in their cruisers and returned back to Hopkinsville for the night, leaving the Suttons and the Taylors behind at the farmhouse. And as they tried to settle in for a night of restless sleep, trying to forget about what had happened the past several hours, the occupants thought they could hear something moving outside. It was Glennie who saw it first from her bed, a faint glow just outside the window. They were back. Frozen in her bed with a clear view of the window, Glennie laid still as she witnessed one of the creatures reaching its clawed hand onto the screen of the window, peering in and surveying the room with its yellow eyes, finally coming to a stop when its met with Glennie's. Softly, but still with a frightened voice, Glennie called out to the rest of the room's occupants, trying not to scare the creature off. Lucky, however, came bounding over as he picked up on the distressing tone of his mother's voice. He raised up his gun again and stated he was going to shoot, but Glennie tried to intervene by saying, "For God's sake, don't." After all, Glennie was the only one at the house who cared to realize the creatures only ever approached the house slowly with their arms in the air, acting like as if they didn't mean any harm. But Lucky wasn't hearing any of it. He responded with, "Mama, I'm going to shoot that little man." The Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter of the first and third kind is, while famously known, is also constantly under debate among skeptics and believers who relentlessly try to one-up one another by thinking or coming up with compelling evidence to support their own sides. Fortunately for us, this means there are a lot of details, theories, and facts we can dig into and break down. Unfortunately though, there's so much I think I'll have to break this episode into 2 parts. But don't worry though, I won't make you guys wait 2 weeks to hear the second part about the follow-up investigation. I'll hopefully be posting the next episode next week so long as I can get everything finished in time. So I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about the story of the Kentucky Goblins, and I hope you'll join me next week as we break down what truly could have happened during the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter in August of 1955. Also, if you haven't already, and if you feel like doing me a favor, go ahead and give the podcast a 5-star review on whatever app you're listening on. It goes a long way to helping the podcast grow and allow others to come across it. And if you have any family or friends who you think might be interested in hearing about goblins trying to invade a farmhouse, feel free to share the podcast with them, and I'd really appreciate it. So keep an eye out for the show in your feed, and I hope I see you next week. Until then, take care.